I thought it was just another family dinner, until my daughter slammed the table and everything spiraled out of control. But the real shocker? It came from the person I least expected. Don't skip a second, because the ending will leave you questioning everything you know about family. It was supposed to be a normal Sunday dinner. You know the kind: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with a little too much butter, and a side of, "Why don't you call your mother more often?" The table was set with my favorite floral tablecloth, the one with the tiny coffee stain I always try to hide under the bread basket. The house smelled like home, and for a moment I thought, this is what it's all about. Family, food, and a little bit of chaos. I'd spent the afternoon fussing over the gravy, making sure it was just the right consistency, and reminding myself not to bring up politics or Emily's new boyfriend. I even put on lipstick, which, let's be honest, is a big deal these days. Emily, my sweet, polite, wouldn't-hurt-a-fly daughter, was home from college for the weekend. She'd been quieter than usual, but I chalked it up to midterms and the stress of being 20-something in a world that seems to spin faster every year. My son, Ben, was already at the table, shoveling mashed potatoes onto his plate like he hadn't eaten in a week. My husband, Tom, was pouring himself a glass of iced tea, humming that old tune he always hums when he's happy. It was all so normal, comforting even. And then, out of nowhere, Emily slammed her hand on the table so hard the salt shaker did a little jig and nearly toppled into the gravy boat. The sound echoed through the dining room, bouncing off the walls and landing squarely in the pit of my stomach. For a split second, time froze. My fork was halfway to my mouth, a piece of chicken dangling precariously from the tines. Ben's eyes went wide, his mouth forming a perfect O, as if he'd just seen a ghost. Even the dog, who'd been lurking under the table in hopes of a dropped morsel, slunk away to the living room, tail between his legs. And then she said it. Loud, clear, and with a fury I'd never heard from her before. "Enough, Mom! Get out of here! No one wants you at this table!" The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like a plate that's just slipped from your hands and is about to shatter on the floor. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I was too shocked to let them fall. My mind raced. What had I done? Was it the gravy? Did I say something wrong? Was this about her boyfriend? Or maybe the time I accidentally shrunk her favorite sweater in the wash? A million possibilities flashed through my head, each one more ridiculous than the last. I looked at Tom, hoping for some kind of lifeline, but he was just as stunned as I was. He stood up, slow as molasses, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He looked at Emily with eyes so full of pain, I swear I felt it in my own chest. Tom isn't a man of many words, but when he looks at you like that, you know something big is about to happen. Ben, bless his heart, tried to disappear into his mashed potatoes, as if he could just blend in and avoid the whole mess. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you just walked out? Just picked up your purse, grabbed your keys, and left the chaos behind? Or would you stand your ground, plant your feet, and demand an explanation? I'll admit for a split second I considered both. I imagined myself storming out, slamming the door behind me, and driving to the nearest hotel for a night of peace and quiet. Maybe order room service, watch a movie, and pretend I was someone else for a while. But then I thought about the look on Tom's face, the way Ben was shrinking into his chair, and the tears threatening to spill from Emily's eyes. Even as she glared at me, I didn't have time to wonder, because what happened next was something none of us could have predicted. Tom, usually the calm in our family storm, the one who always knows how to diffuse a tense situation with a joke or a gentle word, did something I'd never seen before. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He just stood there, silent, letting the weight of the moment settle over all of us. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop, or, more likely in our house, a fork clatter to the floor. I glanced at Emily, searching her face for a clue, a sign, anything that would explain this sudden outburst. Her jaw was set, her eyes blazing, but beneath the anger, I saw something else. Fear, maybe, or hurt. It was like looking at a storm cloud and seeing the sun trying to break through. I wanted to reach out, to pull her into a hug and tell her everything would be okay, but I was rooted to my chair, paralyzed by the shock of it all. Tom finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "Emily," he said, "that's enough. Just 3 words, but they carried the weight of 1,000 conversations we'd never had. Emily's shoulders slumped, and for a moment she looked like a little girl again, lost and overwhelmed. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat, and that's when I realized this wasn't just about dinner or mashed potatoes or even me. Something deeper was brewing beneath the surface, something that had been building for a long time. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Our family was about to face a storm, and none of us would come out the same on the other side. You know that feeling when you're about to sneeze, but it just won't come? That's what the silence felt like in our dining room. It was thick, electric, and just a little bit itchy, like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break the tension. I sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, staring at the roast chicken as if it might offer me some sage advice. Ben was still frozen, his fork suspended in midair, a dollop of mashed potatoes threatening to slide off and make a break for it. Emily, my beautiful, stubborn daughter, sat rigid in her chair, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, her jaw set in that way that always meant trouble. And Tom, my sweet, steady Tom, stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of pain and confusion. For a moment, I wondered if we'd all just sit there forever, locked in this strange tableau, until the food went cold and the dog came back to see if anyone had dropped a drumstick. But then Tom cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed to echo off the walls. He looked at Emily, his eyes soft but firm, and said, "Emily, I think you owe your mother an apology." His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard in years, not since the time Ben tried to flush his action figures down the toilet and flooded the upstairs bathroom. This was Tom in protective mode, and I'll admit, it sent a little shiver down my spine. Emily's face turned redder than my favorite lipstick, the one I save for special occasions. Like weddings or the rare date night when Tom and I actually make it out of the house. She opened her mouth, her voice trembling with frustration. "Dad, you don't understand. She's always—" But before she could finish, Tom did something I never expected. He walked around the table, his footsteps slow and deliberate, and took my hand in his. His grip was warm and reassuring, and for a moment I felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. "If your mother's not welcome, then neither am I," he said, his voice steady and clear. I nearly dropped my mashed potatoes right then and there. I mean, have you ever seen your partner take your side so fiercely you want to both hug them and ask if they're feeling okay? That was me, sitting there with my heart pounding in my chest, wondering if I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's family drama. Ben's eyes darted back and forth between us, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Emily looked like she'd been slapped, her anger melting into something softer, confusion maybe, or even fear. The silence stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second. I could feel the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, determined not to let them fall. I glanced at Tom, searching his face for a sign, a clue, anything to help me make sense of what was happening. He squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing small circles on my skin, and I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. In that moment, I realized just how lucky I was to have him by my side, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the dam broke. Emily's shoulders slumped, and she buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. The sound was heartbreaking, raw and unfiltered, and it cut through me like a knife. Ben, ever the peacemaker, reached across the table and placed a tentative hand on her arm, his eyes wide with concern. It's okay," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're all just stressed, I guess." I wanted to reach out, to pull Emily into my arms and tell her that everything would be all right, but I hesitated. I didn't want to push her further away, not when she was already so fragile. Instead, I took a deep breath and tried to steady my own nerves. "Emily," I said softly, "I know things have been tough lately. I know I'm not perfect, and I probably say the wrong thing more often than I should. But I love you, we all do, and nothing you say or do will ever change that." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, counting down the seconds until someone found the courage to speak. Finally, Emily lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I didn't mean it. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to ask for help." My heart broke a little at her words, but I also felt a surge of hope. This was the first real conversation we'd had in months, maybe even years. I squeezed Tom's hand, grateful for his strength, and reached across the table to take Emily's. "You don't have to do it alone, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. "We're here for you, always." Ben nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, even if Mom does make us eat green beans." The tension in the room eased, and for the first time all night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we weren't as broken as I'd feared. Maybe, just maybe, we could weather this storm together. As the tears dried and the laughter slowly returned, I realized that sometimes it takes a little chaos to remind us what really matters. Family, love, and the courage to face the storm together. The moment Emily's tears started, it was as if the whole room exhaled. The tension that had been coiled so tightly around us finally loosened, and the anger that had filled the air just moments before seemed to dissolve, replaced by something softer. Fear, relief, and, if I'm being honest, a little bit of embarrassment. There's nothing quite like a family meltdown to make you feel exposed, like you're standing in your underwear in the middle of the street. But as Emily's sobs grew louder, I realized that this was the moment we'd all been tiptoeing around for months, maybe even years. The dam had finally broken, and there was no going back. "I'm sorry," Emily cried, her voice cracking as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm just so stressed out. School, work, everything. And I took it out on you, Mom. I didn't mean it." Her words tumbled out in a rush, raw and unfiltered, and I felt my own tears start to fall, hot and silent. I wanted to reach across the table and pull her into my arms, to tell her that it was okay, that I understood. But I was afraid that if I moved, the fragile peace we'd found would shatter all over again. Tom, always the steady one, squeezed my hand under the table. His touch was warm and reassuring, a silent reminder that we were in this together. He looked at Emily, his eyes softening, and said, "We all have bad days, Em, but this family, we stick together." His words hung in the air, simple and true, and I could see the relief wash over Emily's face. She sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve, and managed a shaky smile. I couldn't help but laugh through my own tears, the absurdity of the situation hitting me all at once. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "if you're going to kick me out, at least let me take the pie." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and for a split second I worried that I'd said the wrong thing. But then Ben snorted and Tom chuckled, and even Emily let out a watery giggle through her sniffles. The laughter was contagious, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. And soon we were all laughing, the kind of laughter that leaves you breathless and a little bit lighter. Isn't it funny how the worst moments can turn into the ones you remember most? I've always believed that families are like patchwork quilts, stitched together from scraps of joy and sorrow, anger and forgiveness, all the messy, beautiful moments that make up a life. That night, as we sat around the table, surrounded by half-eaten chicken and cold mashed potatoes, I realized that this was one of those moments. The kind you look back on years later and say, "Remember when Emily tried to kick Mom out of dinner?" And everyone laughs because the pain has faded and all that's left is the love. Emily wiped her eyes, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but there was a new softness in her expression. "I really am sorry, Mom," she said, her voice small but sincere. I feel like I'm drowning sometimes. There's so much pressure to be perfect, to get good grades, to make everyone proud. And I know you're just trying to help, but sometimes it feels like too much." Her confession hung in the air, vulnerable and honest, and I felt my heart ache for her. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to be perfect, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. "None of us are, and you don't have to carry all that weight by yourself. We're here for you no matter what." Tom nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and Ben gave Emily's arm a reassuring squeeze. For a moment, we just sat there, holding hands and sharing the silence, letting the love and forgiveness settle over us like a warm blanket. It wasn't a perfect moment. There were still tears, and the mashed potatoes were definitely cold. But it was real. And sometimes that's enough. As the storm passed and the laughter faded, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The lesson from that night stuck with us, woven into the fabric of our family. We learned that it's okay to fall apart sometimes, to say the wrong thing or lose your temper. What matters is that you come back together, that you forgive and move forward, stronger than before. Later, as we cleared the table and packed up the leftovers, Emily hugged me tight, her arms wrapped around me like she never wanted to let go. "Thanks for not leaving," she whispered, and I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. "Not as long as there's pie." We all laughed again, the sound echoing through the house, and I knew that no matter what storms came our way, we'd weather them together. Because that's what families do. They stick together through the good, the bad, and even the mashed potatoes. After that night, something shifted in our house. It wasn't dramatic, like a thunderclap or a sudden burst of sunlight through the clouds, but more like the gentle turning of a page. Our family dinners, which had always been a little routine, safe topics, polite laughter, and the occasional eye roll, started to feel different. There was a new openness, a willingness to talk about the hard stuff, not just the weather or what was on sale at the grocery store. It was as if that one explosive moment, with Emily's hand slamming the table and all our emotions spilling out, had cracked us open in the best possible way. The very next Sunday, as I set the table, I caught myself glancing at the salt shaker, half expecting it to do another little jig. Emily came into the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and gave me a sheepish smile. "Need any help, Mom?" she asked, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. It wasn't just a polite offer. She really wanted to be there, to be part of the process. I handed her the salad bowl and watched as she tossed the greens, her movements a little more relaxed than they'd been in weeks. There was still a hint of tension, a shadow of what had happened, but it was softer now, tempered by understanding. When we all sat down, there was a moment of hesitation, as if we were all waiting to see if the storm would return. But instead, Emily looked around the table, her eyes meeting each of ours, and said, "I just want to say I'm sorry again, for everything." Her voice was steady, but I could see the vulnerability there, the hope that we'd all moved on. I reached over and squeezed her hand, giving her my best mom smile, the one that says, "You're forgiven and you always will be." Tom, never one to let a moment get too heavy, grinned and said, "Well, as long as nobody's getting kicked out tonight, I think we're off to a good start." Ben snorted into his water, and even Emily laughed, the sound light and genuine. I couldn't resist adding, "Hey, if you ever need to slam the table again, just warn me so I can save the gravy." That got a real laugh from everyone, and for a moment I felt the last of the tension melt away. It was as if we'd all agreed silently that the table was a safe place again, a place for honesty, for laughter, and yes, even for the occasional outburst. Over the next few weeks, our conversations grew deeper. We talked about school and work, of course, but also about the things that really mattered, the fears that kept us up at night, the dreams we were afraid to say out loud, the little victories and the big disappointments. Emily started opening up about her classes, about the pressure she felt to be perfect, and about how lonely it could be to try to live up to everyone's expectations. Ben, who usually kept his feelings close to the vest, admitted that he sometimes felt lost, unsure of what he wanted to do after graduation. Even Tom shared stories from his own college days, tales I'd never heard before, about the mistakes he'd made and the lessons he'd learned. We laughed a lot, sometimes until our sides hurt. There were tears too, but they felt cleansing, like a summer rain that leaves everything fresh and new. I realized that sometimes the table needs a good shake to remind us what really matters. It's not about the perfect meal or the spotless tablecloth. It's about showing up, being real, and loving each other through the messiness of life. One night, as we cleared the dishes, Emily hugged me from behind, her arms wrapped tight around my waist. "Thanks for not giving up on me, Mom," she whispered. I turned and hugged her back, holding her close. Never, I said. You're stuck with me. We both laughed, and I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Even the little things changed. Emily started helping with dinner more often, and Ben took over setting the table, making sure the salt shaker was always in the center. For balance, he joked. Tom started a new tradition. At the end of every meal, we'd go around the table and share one thing we were grateful for. Some nights it was big. I'm grateful for my family. Other nights, it was small. I'm grateful Mom didn't burn the rolls. But every night, it was real. Looking back, I realized that the night Emily slammed the table was a turning point for us. It was messy and painful, and not at all what I would have chosen, but it forced us to be honest, with ourselves and with each other. It reminded us that love isn't always neat or easy, but it's always worth fighting for. So let me ask you, when was the last time your family had a moment like this? Did it bring you closer, or did you just end up with mashed potatoes on the wall? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're all in this together. And who knows? Maybe your story will help someone else find the courage to shake their own table. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales from the family table. Because life's too short for boring dinners, and there's always room for one more at our table.